Welcome, everybody, to another Unboxed podcast. This is episode 36 of the Microsoft Unboxed.
36.
Yeah, the Microsoft Unboxed pod. I'm your host today, Kareem Anderson. I'm joined by,
David Allen, we are halfway to 40, my friend.
again, we got a thinking godly years, like long term. Like this is just the beginning. We're just now toddlers, essentially, in the podcasting world. We're getting our feet underneath us. I make that joke that they had, I think, in Ghostbusters, one of the most recent ones, where the podcaster is a kid named Podcast on there, and he says the podcast doesn't start getting its stride until like episode 45. So when we get to 45,
All
ladies and
right, all
gentlemen,
right, all right. That'll work.
we would check back in with you. But
Will
before
will
then, you
we
can always.
consider will we consider ourselves potty trained by 45?
I think so. I think so. We'll check out the comments. We'll see what people have to say, what they do and do not like, and maybe we'll make some adjustments based on that. With that being said, let's get you into our stories today so that you can judge us on those. Um, we're going to be talking about Apple for a little bit. At the beginning, we see that they could be working on a game store for iOS, which is interesting because you think that'd be kind of baked in already at this point. But we got some details that my co-host David's going to go over. We got Microsoft still, surprisingly to everyone's interest, working on HoloLens headsets, but it's for the military. That contract that we've talked about, I've talked about over the years, is still going through. But there's been a new wrinkle in it. Not a negative one. Usually we report on the negative ones. This is just an interesting new development in that headset project. We will also be talking about Xbox wireless headsets and what's new about them, what you might like about it. Might want to go grab one for this weekend because it is Happy Call of Duty Day for the rest of you who celebrate that. We'll be talking about
And the
Qualcomm.
internet is still alive. We have not broken it yet.
Because some responsible people went to work. We'll see what happens at around 5:30, 6 o'clock tonight, or your local time. With that being said, we're also going to be talking about Qualcomm going at Intel using specs charts and some other benchmarking things to say, hey, you guys are liars. Intel had a big showing of their Lunar Lake chips back in September at IFA, and Qualcomm just had their Snapdragon Summit, and they're saying all the numbers that they said, basically all the numbers that they said during IFA, Intel said during IFA, were bogus. We'll get into that and some of those specs as well, and I can give you some firsthand experience as well between having tested both of those devices. We'll also be talking about another criticism, which is being levied at Microsoft from Salesforce. Our old friend Mark Benioff is back at it again, uh, nagging at the coattails of Microsoft's AI efforts, but some of you might be surprised. You might have a point. The next thing we're talking about is ARM canceling Qualcomm's license to make ARM chips and the reckoning that will happen if and when this does come to light. Last, we'll be wrapping up with Apple being about 2 years behind on AI, according to Mark Gurman, who is everyone's kind of established as the Apple guy. With all that being said, I'm going to stop talking and let David jump in and give us our first headline, please.
All right, let's get this one kicked off since today is Call of Duty Day. For those that have been under a rock, Call of Duty Day is usually and has been an important day for multiplayer gamers that like FPS games. And you look at me starting with the wrong headline here. I hope I'm not confusing
It's all good.
my
It's still a gaming headline.
yeah, it's still a gaming headline. So what kind of cover both of them here?
Yeah, we'll wrap it
I
all up.
guess I guess Apple could be getting involved at some point with Call of Duty because there is Call of Duty Mobile out there. So Apple is supposedly talking about working on an Apple game store for iOS. Now, when I first read this headline, I got to say, I said, "What the heck?" For two reasons. Apple has been the one that has spearheaded the Epic Games deal with wanting to do licensing, money, wanting to do their own game store, and Apple wanting to make sure they get their profits. So, report says, and this came from 9 to 5 Max, so I want to make sure they get full credit here. Apple could be working on the game store for iOS 18 or iOS 19. Roughly, the game store could have a Play Now tab that allows users to jump right in with friends, find editorials on games, content, and more. The new game store, and this is part of what got me, would have Game Center integration. Now, I thought, having been a former Apple owner myself, that Game Center was Apple's effort. No, Game Center and the supposed game store that might happen will be intertwined together so we get social events, leaderboards, etc. for your games and ways to communicate with your fellow players. Now, let's keep in mind, Apple also has Apple Arcade sitting out there, which is a little more confusing. It is a $6.99 monthly subscription that allows you to play certain titles across the Apple ecosystem on your Mac, on your iPad, and on your iPhone. Now, I get it. We're in the age where everybody wants a gaming store, everybody sees the next profit, everybody sees the next profit opportunity. We've got Xbox and Microsoft supposedly still working on their gaming store. We got Epic Games that still wants to get their gaming store off the ground. Now, Apple has thrown themselves into the pot and says, we've got a store coming. Now, Apple, you can well bet, is probably going to keep theirs for their ecosystem. You would have to have your iCloud membership. You would be able to access the store similar to going out and buying a phone. I question why we need multiple gaming apps inside one ecosystem. It seems a bit confusing to me. Game Center out there, arcade out there, possible game store, only for Apple users because I think that's a little much. Maybe Apple and Tim Cook see a lot of things that I don't see because I'm not a daily or even a weekly Apple user by any means. So hey, you guys tell me, why do we need an Apple game store?
We
Because
don't,
a
but I
lot of
can't be a hypocrite because we had
okay,
the same issue
do
with
do that
Microsoft.
for me.
Microsoft had Game Pass and they had the Xbox app. I think this is just the beginning of consolidating. So you throw out or you get teams that are hyper focused on specific aspects of each thing and let them run against each other as far as release dates and feature sets. So, hey, the Game Center releases a bunch of stuff. They're not hindered by the, having to be part of, attached to another thing as far as releases are concerned or feature sets. What you do is you let them all just run out and do as far as fast as they can. And eventually you wrangle them in to one app. And I think this is Apple's version of that. Now, again, they're not typically
I
known
can
for
see that.
developing that way. They are known for not giving us anything while they internally do that. And then years later saying, here's your one app that just happens to work perfectly out of the gate. I think what we're seeing is they're doing more open development, sort of like Google and Microsoft, who are notorious for this. Like, again, there's the long running historical joke of Google having 13 messaging apps at any given time and then consolidating them to then reopen them because I think that's, again, the way they develop. So I don't want to be a hypocrite. I think Apple is just doing something that we're not used to seeing in the same way that, again, we were all over Microsoft about the last 2 weeks ago. They consolidated their apps. So I think, we will see them bring it all into one a couple years from now, eventually, if this is true, bring it all into one.
If it is true, is let me go off record here.
Mhm.
If it is true, is this store successful for Apple? Do Apple users want it? Yeah, that's the response I was looking for from you, because You know, what gets me, it goes back to that routine. Having owned Apple products, what do? We go in the App Store. You get the game you want, you play. Now, when you launch that game, if it has Game Center integration, that pops up when you launch the game and says "Welcome to Game Center" and shows you your, information. I just don't see where this approach ends in success.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's the same thing we've been telling Microsoft. It's the game, stupid. You could have the best
Yes.
user interface. I mean, Apple Arcade, I wouldn't argue was a bad experience. It's an experience that is kind of lackluster because of the games. I think people will jump through the hoops if the experience, if again the buzz behind it is huge. If everyone's talking to each other, like the same way it was when Insomniac came out with the Spider-Man thing, it was like people were willing who were not PlayStation owners to be like, hey, that game, everyone's talking about it. It is on Twitch all over the place. It is on YouTube. I mean, like, I want to be part of this experience. I would jump through the hoops of leaving the Xbox ecosystem or Switch or whatever to then do it because that game is worth it. I think Apple's going to, before they can even get arcade off the ground, which has been what, 4 years now, something like that, a little bit older than that. They're going to need the games to be like, hey, this is the one game, this is the Angry Birds of this generation. Now
Mhm.
people will dive in, but I think until they do that, it's going to be floating out there the same way it has been.
Unless, and this kind of ties into one of our stories later, and I'm just going to make this comment and leave it here. Unless we have ARM PCs, we have Macs based on the ARM architecture. Unless Apple sees something that we don't, and they very well may, that some kind of major titles are coming to Mac on ARM to game. So we better have our store ready because those apps are going to run on your new phones and the new iPad M4s and the M4s that we're going to start announcing next Monday. I'm just throwing that out there hypothetically. Unless Apple sees something that we don't and they have discussed with developers, okay, you're going to be able to easily bring your um, AAA title to Apple. I could
I
see
mean,
that.
that
That's not
that's
too
that's
far of a
basically what I
reach.
was saying. It's still the game, but the other problem that they have is the underlying community aspect. They don't have a PSN. They don't have an Xbox
It's
network.
true.
So even if the games are amazing, how do I convey that to you that, hey, I'm on an Apple device and I want to play this amazing game with you and we can have achievement wars and stuff like that? They don't have that in place just yet. So to your point, and I'm gonna leave it here because we got to go to the next topic. Maybe they do. Maybe there is a game that Unreal has been showing them, or that they've been going to be powering. That they're like, hey, in 3 years, this game is going to be the ish, and you need to have Apple's ecosystem to do it. They also have to establish for gamers the trust in saying, hey, I want to invest my multiplayer ecosystem in this one now. I want to add a new one in addition to this, Nintendo one or the Microsoft one or whatever. With that being said, let's move on to our next topic, which is Microsoft and the U.S. Army are still working together. And you can take that for however you want, in good ways or bad ways. I know that Microsoft employees see it as a bad thing. They've been on, not all of them, but some have been on record saying that, they'd rather not have this contract in general. But for what it's worth, it's still there. And this time around, though, after we've had a history of the Army pushing back on Microsoft's development, its timing, its budgetary constraints, things like that, uh, and whether or not it's not going to have their guys in the field throwing up all over the place. They seem to have gotten past most of those road bumps. They will have another test come next summer, I believe, middle of 2025, where they need to prove to the Army that, hey, these things are fully capable. And I think this may be the last round to this historic, potentially $21.9 billion deal, multi-year deal between the two of them. This newest wrinkle is that the U.S. Army wants them to reduce the cost of the headsets, and I'm assuming this is per unit. And they would like it to be quote unquote significantly less than $80,000. 80, yeah, $80,000. And again, this isn't for the whole contract because the whole contract's potentially worth 21.9 billion. This, I'm assuming this is per headset. And the way that they built it out is that it costs $41,000 per unit currently, and that's just for the headset by itself. I mean, the headset, the harness, and the battery, not on top of the R&D that the military is pouring into, refining some of this stuff, its own IVS technology, which I believe IVS stands for Integrated Visual Augmented Systems. This is being co-developed with Microsoft. So after you factor in all of the R&D, the marketing, and some of the other expenses, it comes up at, they say, about to roughly $80,000 per unit to put these on their soldiers. If Microsoft can get it significantly less than that, maybe down to the 41 with all that other stuff on top of it, they'll go ahead and probably proceed with the contract. Well, we got this report from Bloomberg, and I just wanted to note that the U.S. Congress passed a $842 billion military budget for 2024, but they still found time to nickel and dime Microsoft for these headsets. Microsoft recently partnered with Anduril Industries, I believe, and we know that the last time we reported on this, and this might have been, excuse me, about a year ago, that they had been working on a thinner, lighter version of the HoloLens headset. And, everyone was at the time speculating that this could be the prototype for the HoloLens 3. We all know that's not going to be true because Microsoft's basically trashed HoloLens as a consumer product, and probably for the most part a commercial one. And it will essentially live as a defense tool going forward, if and when Microsoft does finalize this contract. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I'm surprised this contract is still going. We talked about it a little bit. You know, we talked about it a little bit off mic, and I thought basically when the Hololens division was kind of canned earlier this year, this would go along with it because I was under the assumption that with the technology and the money that our military has, that the military would be developing their own customized version of this and not need Microsoft to provide these headsets. They would be producing and this is a made up name, the military version of the HoloLens, just for the military that does military things, that does exactly what they need. They produce it, they manufacture it, they get it at their budget. It's paid for, when the military budget is put out every year. And there would be no third party involved, and Microsoft would not have an involvement except maybe on a software level, possibly.
Well, I hate to
I
break it to
I
you.
was surprised here.
A lot of the military outsources a lot of their technology to third parties anyway, so defense contractors. So we get a military budget, and then the military doles out for the projects that they want to invest, see returns on. So it's rare that we make our own tanks versus or take technology. We outsource it to a defense contractor, and then they provide
True.
us a product that we then pay for. So Microsoft doing this is all kind of part and parcel. Like the military is not going to create its own headset. They will give specs and parameters on what they need, and they'll have another company make it, and they'll say, "Hey, part of now that we've been allocated $842 billion, here's your check. Give us our product or whatever." It's just interesting that Microsoft has been the one that's kind of kept going. Again, we used to hear about Magic Leap. We used to hear about these. It's surprising Meta hasn't been brought into this conversation to kind of
I thought about
you know
that too, or
to get
or
Microsoft off
even
its butt.
Vive.
Yes, exactly. To get Microsoft at least off its butt and competing a little better. They seem to be settled on Microsoft and just waiting for them to kind of produce what they need specifically. So again, it's not a very long story to talk about, but we'll see. We'll probably check back in with Microsoft next summer to see how that headset's doing and whether or not this will be the final word on that. And they move forward, or to what we just said, maybe they bring in Meta, maybe they bring in HTC
Well,
to kind of
I want to throw out a question, and maybe it's in an article somewhere that I haven't read yet. How many of these headsets does the Army need? Not every. I know we're not in a situation where every soldier is wearing a HoloLens headset. and we may never know exactly what they're used for, of course.
I think the
But
first orders for 125,000, I think, is the first order that they're supposed to meet or match, or they've at least started testing. And I'm
that's more than
assuming,
I thought.
yeah, they're going. I mean, we have military everywhere. I think the idea is to give whoever's in command of certain specific units that ability, and then again, as the technology becomes more apt, if we can get it down to the Ray-Ban size, I'm sure they would like every soldier to have it.
Oh yes,
So again, this is why it's a multi-year thing. I think it's over 10 years. They're going to get this 29 or 21, 29 point billion or whatever it was to continue producing these and to get the cost even further down to where it's negligible and the technology more refined to where it's potentially more accurate and lethal. So, with that being said, we're moving on to another type of headset. And I think this is the one you want to talk about, which is
yep.
the fixed wireless headset.
I tried to jump the gun on this one on you, buddy, and I'm sorry.
It's all. Hey, it
But
segues from eye headsets, eyewear headsets to ear headsets. Now, imagine if you had the whole contraption.
exactly, and for those that have been watching the podcast and watching what I write on the site, I love the game. So today is a little bit of an exciting day for me on many points, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. But as we know, today is Call of Duty Day. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is out there. It's out there for the first time under the Xbox umbrella. It's out there in streaming for the first time. GE Force Now, there's a post up on the website about this. GE Force Now even picked it up and added it to their streaming library for today. So the internet pipes out there are a little warm and toasty today. We've got streaming Call of Duty for the first time on multiple platforms. We've got Call of Duty on Game Pass. I personally, I have the title sitting on my Xbox. I have not booted it up yet because I know once I boot it up, I want to have some time to dig into it. So if you guys want to leave me a comment about what you think of the game, let me know. And we'll kind of segue into the new Xbox wireless headset, which I find interesting, dropped right around the time of guess what? The new Call of Duty. Now, this is not a major update to the existing Microsoft branded wireless headset. This model does support wireless Dolby Atmos, which is supported in Call of Duty. So if you want the best sound possible, you might want to go pick this thing up. It is an all black design. The original design, I've got one of the originals. The original design has a little bit of the Xbox green on it. This is an all black design with a little bit better microphone to, if your wife, your girlfriend, your kids are yelling at you, you can kind of cut them out a little bit, maybe hear things a little better. You've got Bluetooth as well built into this one, so you can have multiple connections to your phone when your wife or your girlfriend, while you're playing Call of Duty, or maybe your wife or your girlfriend's playing with you, when they're tired of yelling at you and you don't hear them, they can call you on that phone that you've paired to that headset to make you hear what they need you to say. So we've got that. We've got 20 hours of battery life in this one, and this one is $10 more than the original was. I bought my original for $99.99 from Best Buy. This one starts and is available today for $109.99. And again, not nagging, not dogging wives and girlfriends out there. I know wives and girlfriends play Call of Duty too. Um, I've seen as many women as I have men playing Call of Duty once the games get going. But at least if you're being nagged, you've got a phone. You won't have to take this new headset off your head to get the message.
Yeah, I mean, less about wives and girlfriend stuff, but what about your own buddies who are dropped from a Xbox party and need to communicate with you? Hey, I need to be re-added and things like that. And instead
That's
of
true.
going through the messaging app that which takes you out of the game, stuff like that. They just hop on their phone and say, "Hey, add me back," or I need to leave for whatever reason. It's just a little easier for everybody. One last note is that the this thing is powered by Qualcomm's S5 Gen 2 chip,
Yes.
apparently, and that's supposed to help with a better lag-free experience. So, if you're wondering, again, the other old headset I believe also supported Dolby Atmos, but I don't know if it was wirelessly. What the other benefits are? It's basically battery life and better uh, latency, a better latency experience.
And you had to buy the because I did it. You had to buy the little.
Yeah,
It was a little bit. It was a little bit smoke and mirrors. You had to pay for the Dolby Atmos app
correct.
on your Xbox to get the Dolby Atmos experience. So I personally think that's where the extra $10 factors in because somebody, has to now pay Dolby for that Dolby Atmos license. So I'm thinking that's, part of where the extra $10
Okay, I'll take it. I don't have
factors
to worry
in.
about
Now,
another app.
my question is, and another journalist raised this question. We've got $100 headset here. How does it stand up against the Turtle Beaches of the world?
Good question.
And the Steel series of the world. So some of you gamers jump in there. Does it stand up? Is it worth the $100, or do you need to go ahead and push your budget up and buy something else?
Yeah, because it sounds like a lot of great connectivity and sound, but I wonder how these speakers will. Because again, communication goes two ways. How that works out.
Hmm.
Moving on to the next thing, we'll be talking about Qualcomm outing Intel's Lunar Lake comparisons. I use the word misleading because I don't like to curse in my headline titles, but they're essentially calling BS on what Intel kind of brought to the table when they rolled out their Lunar Lake announcements back in September, I believe it was. Yeah, September was for IFA. We'll start with kind of some of the debunking. Well, I think Intel had a list of like slides that they were showing at this Qualcomm Summit 2024, I believe, in Hawaii this year, and it just wrapped up this week. They had about 3 days of 2 days of keynotes and another couple of days of exploring PCs that will be powered by this new device and kind of going through it. But again, according to Qualcomm, Snapdragon X Elite chips managed to outperform Intel's Lunar Lake in single multi-core performances when Intel had their own showcase in IFA saying that that was not the case. They came out with their sheets showing that I believe the X Elite chip outperformed about 10% faster than its competition. Again, and I believe it was single core, and then multi core was a little bit. It was actually worse for Intel as well. The chip managed to outperform the Core Ultra 2 series, again, what we're calling the Lunar Lake generation based chip, while consuming actually roughly 38% less power. So not only were they outperforming as far as speed's concerned, they were consuming less power, and that's the biggest draw. That's always been Intel's Achilles heel. Now, again, as we go through the story, keep in the back of your mind that Lunar Lake is impressive. It is impressive for what Intel has been able historically to do. It's just that the exaggerations are being caught by Qualcomm essentially, and were sort of unnecessary if you wanted to kind of go head to head. But hey, it's marketing; you kind of need to do it.
Chip
According to Qualcomm,
wars.
yeah, chip wars are back. According to Qualcomm, the X Elite chip took the crown about being 50% faster to its competitor in the multi-core. So again, it was 10% faster single core, 50% faster in multi-core, and I believe in order for Intel to match any of that type of performance to come close to it, it had to suck that about 113% more power. Where Intel really drops off is when it's unplugged. And this is probably the most damning comparison is that the X Elite chips were allowed to they managed to perform all of those numbers unplugged. Intel had to be plugged in, and when you take it off of that, I believe they ended up taking down how much more, or I think they were throttled about 50% of those numbers. So it was back and forth between Qualcomm uh, and Intel when it comes to these reports. What are your thoughts before I get in a few more details towards the end of this? about
Well, I
Intel
don't
saying,
want.
"Hey, we have an amazing chip. It does better than Qualcomm," and then Qualcomm saying, "Yeah, your chip's good. Our chip's still better."
Well, I think that I don't want to steal any thunder from the rest of your story here, but I'm going to say it. You have reviewed the Lunar Lake chips so far for us, and you can comment more on this than I can. But I love my Snapdragon laptops. And I love the fact that Intel and Qualcomm are up here throwing jabs at each other. To me, this is great. This is what, as a consumer, I want to see. This is the entertainment as a journalist that I want to see because this is good for our industry. This puts more devices in my hand. This puts more devices in your hand for our reviews and our editorials. But it also gives consumers more choices. And when you're barbing back and forth like this, it reminds me of a sports competition. It pushes each other to be better. Intel knows where they have stretched. Qualcomm knows where they have stretched. They know what words have been exchanged and what words are virtually true and what words aren't. I can promise you somewhere in Intel there's a room of Qualcomm PCs and Qualcomm chips. I can assure you the other way around. At Qualcomm, there's a room full of Intel and Intel chips. They know what each other's throwing at the table. I enjoy every second of this, but let's keep it honest. Let's keep it fair. I know that's challenging. I know. And we're going to talk about a negative side of this here in just a minute that may or may not happen. But I am a fan, finally, of where we are in the chip PC landscape. And we've not even thrown in AMD and what they're doing over there with their new series of chips. I mean, if you throw them in the mix, it's a three-horse race. And depending on your workflow, any horse could work for most people.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, AMD caught a couple strays during this exchange. They were not safe from the comparisons, but again, it was mostly Intel. I mean, Qualcomm pointing out Intel's fabrications, exaggerations of its performance. Not only were the chips sucking down more power, because of that, they were also hotter. And this is again another Achilles heels of Intel, and has been mainly the one of the through lines when it comes to Intel's development is that their chips are hotter and louder. They require fans, and even when fans are necessary on the Mac, somehow the Mac operating system and their development and their optimizations tempered a lot of that fan noise. It's just whatever for whatever reason with Wintel, it goes crazy. And having seen Qualcomm come out with their chips that, for the most part, run relatively silent, and when pushed, versus being blasters like Intel's. It's just a little annoying to see that no matter how far Intel can progress with efficiency, those two things, heat and noise, seem to still be baked into their development. Um, to your point, it's great for competition. It'll be interesting to see how this works out because Intel admittedly rushed this chip by about 3 years. So I don't know if they have other chips that will be more performant as the years go on based on this design, because this design is very similar to the way ARM is developed, just with, again, the instruction set for x86. So uh, this chip could have been, the equivalent to Qualcomm had they been given 3 more years to kind of refine it and optimize it and run it out. They have a roadmap of chips that are probably 5, 6 years in development. So 3 years from now, this exact same chip is probably, next year, this exact same chip's probably had a new version that's already being worked on currently, and more tweaks and more optimizations. I know that the uh, TOPS or the MPUs that were, kind of the big talk of the town for a lot of these processors. Uh, Qualcomm is claiming that their performance on their MPUs um, are better, and that they require about, I think Intel's require about 133% more battery to achieve similar metrics when it comes to just writing towards the NPU and its own performance. So, uh, as someone who's used both, I would, plainly say that Intel is about 80% there of where Qualcomm chips are at when it comes to a lot of the normal conveniences that we look for in a processor. Now they have the added benefit of not having to emulate anything, and when emulation is performed or done, that's where Qualcomm kind of takes a hit,
Yes.
and Intel kind of excels. Again, it's now you're basically trading, do emulation off battery versus non-emulation off battery, what your performance is, and you're seeing about an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours less on the Intel version. But again, you don't have to worry about if any of your apps will work, if anything's being emulated, if your developer supports it. So if you're willing to sacrifice maybe an hour or two of battery of good battery performance, already excellent before out of the box for both of these devices. If you're willing to sacrifice maybe an hour or two, the Intel chip is still very good, very performant. But again, you also run into heat and sound depending on who your OEM is. That's really the difference between these two, and we'll see how that proceeds going forward. Our next story is about criticisms Microsoft's getting. You want to lead us into that?
Microsoft getting criticisms. Are we not surprised by that? But this time, it's coming from Salesforce. Salesforce basically has a problem with how Microsoft is developing AI and the AI bots. And my buddy and I will kind of talk about this one together, so maybe we don't drown you out or bore you here too much. So basically, what we have is during the Microsoft Ignite conference this year, there was an announcement of AI sales agents that were going to make their way to Dynamics 365, and Microsoft was going to build these AI agents. There were some of these AI agents were for sales qualifications, supplier communications. Let's see, we had accounting, account reconciliation. We had the customer agents where Salesforce says, "Well, you're not doing enough, Microsoft. You need to do more."
Well, yeah,
So my,
essentially, we
go
have
ahead.
Mark Benioff, who's been a thorn in Microsoft's side for since he's been at Salesforce as the
Mhm.
CEO of Salesforce. And his criticism initially, before Microsoft announced this, was that Microsoft is overhyping AI. He finds it detrimental. He thinks it's a disrespect to the researchers who have put in time. Microsoft kind of just stole their wind and said, "Hey, these are all the great things that AI could do in the future." And he thinks that, again, that does a disservice to AI because what can it do currently? Is his argument. And I said at the beginning of this podcast, you might be surprised that I agree with him. Microsoft has come out of the gate, made a lot of claims that it needs to still back up. And again, they are slowly
Yes.
doing it. They are producing some things, but at the end of the day, uh, Salesforce is a CRM tool essentially, or a cloud provider that is given to businesses to produce sales, to produce a return on investment. That is their entire business proposition. And right now, Microsoft hasn't nailed down a specific example of here's the great return on investment. Now, again, Salesforce creates its own AI agents. That is recently what it was talking about. And to address those complaints, Microsoft came out at Ignite and said, "Hey, we're going to have 10 off the bat, out of the box, sales AI agents to accompany anybody who's using Microsoft 365 things." And to your point, we were talking about the scheduling operations assistant, case management assistant, customer knowledge management agent, customer intent agent, an account reconciliation agent, financial reconciliation agent, a supplier communications agent, a sales order agent, and a sales qualification agent. Now, again, if you are just someone who uses Microsoft 365, these are, if they work well, very uh, they should save you on time. And I think Microsoft has translated that time into being roughly about $50 million per year per company. That is their pitch. There, I think they said during Ignite, like these agents will save companies as much as $50 million a year. I don't know where they get these numbers from and how they translate that, but assuming time, HR resources, and all these other aspects that go into an individual employee, these agents could save that. And so that's why I just want to jump in and kind of give that context before you continue on.
Well, AI bots are never going to be perfect. And I realize I've kind of took a turn here. Um, AI bots are never going to be perfect, and I think these companies wanting to push it Microsoft or push it OpenAI or anybody developing these bots, they're never going to be perfect, and these numbers are put together to put on an executive's desk to get that executive to see. And I think sometimes these numbers are overinflated, to get that executive to see a large number and go, yes, yes, save me that money. Leave that money in the bank account. Write Microsoft that check and write it now. Whether it's Microsoft or somebody else. And then, once the check is processed, how quickly can we get those bots implemented? And that's kind of where Microsoft says, okay, Salesforce, if you're upset, we're going to now put our eyeballs on you and develop better agents to do these things for 2025.
Yeah, to your point,
So,
this reminds me of the conversation Slack was having, and everyone kind of Slack was bullying around Skype and saying, hey, look how efficient it was. And Microsoft said, you know what, you're right. Let's make Teams, and now Teams is competing directly with Slack, and Slack's like, hey, this is the one thing we were supposed to specialize in and do. Now you're doing it, and it's anti-competitive. I do believe Microsoft is bundling, so they do have an argument there. But I feel like Salesforce has kind of wandered into that territory where Microsoft had AI for a bunch of different things, and I don't know if it's necessarily focused on the CRM sales aspect of it, but now it is, and it offers 10 off the bat for 2025. We're just gonna start rolling those out. In addition to that, it's also going to be evaluating or testing a new section in Copilot Studio that will allow businesses to craft their own custom sales agent that are hyper focused on specific financial execution. So if you can't find yourself using the 10 for something more specific or niche that you need, you'll be able to create your own using that. And I believe that'll take a lot of the wind out of what Salesforce offers, unless they are as flexible or customizable in the future as well. And if that's the case, what other benefits do you get from Microsoft's abundance of other uh, things like Power BI to aggregate all that data versus what Salesforce is offering? Again, I'm not a Salesforce expert. Maybe they do offer those kind of things, but it's just going to make their job a little bit harder, I think, going forward.
am I the only one, since we talked about military in the pod here, am I the only one that feels like Salesforce has pulled up a tank into the DMZ zone and they have turned the torrent part way to the Microsoft building, but maybe not all the way. And for now, they're throwing rubber bullets just to see if Microsoft will throw something back. But the thing is, if Microsoft throws something back, you might not like it.
Yeah, this is the whole analogy of the sleeping giant kind of thing, or sleeping dragon. I believe they may have awoken that. Now again, Microsoft is not, it's not indefensible. They could throw out a dud here, and Salesforce runs with it. It could be to their benefit. Who knows how this forms, but they do have in a war of attrition. They do have time and money, so they can keep working at this and refining it to where it needs to be. And I'm not saying Salesforce couldn't do that as well, but if this is the one thing you do, and Microsoft does a bunch of other things, it'll be interesting to see how long this fight goes on. That being said, we're going to move on to our next story, which is ARM throwing a monkey wrench into not only Microsoft but its providers and partners' whole marketing and
Mm-hmm.
business efforts in the next 60 days. By the way, we're going to start talking about Qualcomm versus ARM. Now, you might be scratching your head saying, "Hey, isn't Qualcomm just making ARM?" Well, ARM is actually let me make sure I can get this all because I wrote this up correct. Is actually a British company that bought Nuvia, which is the company that basically created and designed the specific architecture that a lot of ARM chip makers are using. It started with, I believe, Apple was using it for a little bit for their A series processors, and then they went on to make their own version of it, so they no longer rely on Nuvia's chipset design. Uh, Qualcomm, specifically and almost directly relies on Nuvia's design. They did it for the X Elite chips. They've been doing it for previous chips. They've done it for the new chip that's coming out for mobile, I believe, and I think that is the 8 series, I think is what they're calling it, and for whatever the follow up to the X Elite is that's supposed to be coming out in 2025. Where this becomes a problem is that over the past 2 years, I believe, the British semiconductor software design company ARM has been asking Qualcomm to pay the new licensing fees for it. The way it works is that again, the ARM bought Nuvia, and when they bought it, they said, "Here are the new terms based on our acquisition of Nuvia." And Qualcomm said, "Hey, we don't want to pay the new terms. We had a deal with Nuvia already. We're going to continue to pay those deals. Just because you own them doesn't mean you get to charge us more." Well, they're going to be in a court of law in December. But prior to that, ARM has basically said, if you don't pay us, we're going to strip your ability to license this design in the next 60 days. And that became a fact, I believe, yesterday. So we're at day 59 of the 60-day embargo kind of thing. And furthermore, it isn't just we're going to take it from you and you can't make chips based on this design anymore. It's you are now going to need to pull all your chips that are based on this design if they're out in the pub, not out in the public. You can't go to everyone's door and say, give us back your PCs, but the partners will no longer be able to produce that and put them on shelves, which is a big crimp in Microsoft's Windows and ARM's effort. So if either the Surface Pros that are out there, the Surface Laptop 7s that are out there, all of the Dell, HP, Asus, Acer, all of those, some of the Chromebooks that are based on some of these ARM devices or designs will now need to be pulled from the shelves until they sort this out, if they can sort it out. What are your thoughts on this before we get into some of the deadlines and dates?
This is not good. This is straight up bad news. Um, and we can speculate what could happen, what might happen. I'm sure, money is changing hands. The lawyers are, feverishly looking at ways around this, and Qualcomm is looking, at what they can possibly do or could they develop anything. But when you've got OEMs involved, this is what bothers me. You guys know me by now. I go to the consumer side of things often. As a consumer, one, if I start seeing a lot of good sales on Surface Pros and Surface laptops and Snapdragon laptops here in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to know there's bad news coming because they're trying to get these units off the shelf. By the time this makes it down to your Best Buys, to your Amazons, to your Newegg's, to your Microsoft stores, you've got a problem. And I think if this is not resolved with a check passing through or the lawyers making each other happy, I don't want to say it. I love these Snapdragon laptops, but I think the future of a Snapdragon laptop is in trouble.
I
It's
mean,
hard.
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
To their credit, Qualcomm doesn't seem to be too upset by this. Now, again, I wrote this prior to the actual timeline starting, but I believe a spokesperson from Qualcomm basically said, "quote This is more of the same from ARM, more unfounded threats designed to strong arm a longtime partner, interfere with our performance-leading CPUs, and increase royalty rates, regardless of the broad rights under our architecture license. With the trial fast approaching in December, ARM's desperate ploy appears to be an attempt to disrupt the legal process, and its claims for termination is completely baseless. We are confident that Qualcomm's rights under the agreement with ARM will be affirmed. ARM's anti-competitive conduct will not be tolerated." Uh, Prior to this, Qualcomm or ARM went so far as to ask that Qualcomm destroy their chips. It seems that they've moderated their position a little bit by saying just pull them, but they wanted. I think last year they wanted Qualcomm to destroy the chips that have made it into the devices you're just talking about, the Microsoft Pros and Microsoft Surface Pros and the Surface Laptop and all this. So they wanted to destroy the X Elite chips while they were being made. And again, we will find out in December whether or not the courts agree with Qualcomm or if they agree with uh, ARM. And again, they gave them 60 days, so that runs us right into, I think, up until the court date. So uh, I think they can also appeal as well and find some legal ways to keep their stuff on the shelf. But I don't see this being resolved this year.
Mm.
But it is interesting that Microsoft, we reported last week, is playing around with the Intel Lunar Lake stuff. So, maybe for a time being, it's Lunar Lake and AMD again until ARM gets itself sorted out, which is going to be a big drag for the Windows on ARM development because it seemed like it was getting momentum, it was getting steam. But if, as I mentioned, that these Lunar Lake devices, and we'll see what AMD can do, are 80% of what Qualcomm offers without the translation layer, I think people are going to forget about Windows on ARM pretty quickly and move on. And that'll be a hit to everybody going forward. We got one last story. We can wrap this podcast up with talking about development. It's about Apple being 2 years behind on development.
Not
We
surprised.
had, you don't seem very surprised by this. Um, yeah, they're behind on AI, essentially, not Apple Intelligence, actual artificial intelligence, what the rest of the market is talking about. We got a report from Mark Gurman saying that he believes, or at least I guess some internal studies at Apple found that OpenAI's ChatGPT was about 25% more accurate than Apple's Siri, which is based on Apple Intelligence, and was able to answer 30% more questions. And this is what Mark Gurman writes. In fact, some at Apple believe that its generative AI technology, at least so far, is more than 2 years behind the industry leaders. Again, this is from Apple people inside Apple saying this. Gurman is a Apple guy. I wouldn't say he's a fanboy, but he's definitely an insider. He has sources. He knows them very well, and he's saying that it won't last long. And I doubt that it would. Apple has infinite cash and a ton of great minds over there. But to be 2 years behind while also pitching this new phone, Apple Intelligence on the MacBook, it seems again out of sorts for Apple. This goes back to our earlier story about them kind of developing out in the open a new game store. Normally, they would wait till they are ready, refined, to then produce Apple Intelligence and say, "Hey, here it is in its entirety, and this is how well it works." But so far, they've said this is how it will work, and here are some bits and pieces. And from what Gurman says about the release of the Apple Intelligence so far, which again I think it's like 20% of what they've kind of announced at WWDC, he's not impressed by it. He's saying that if the new phones sell, they won't be sold off of Apple Intelligence. They'll be sold off the camera stuff, and that Apple will need to get on it when it comes to keeping or catching up with AI. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree, but I'm going to give Apple. I tell you what, I'm going to be the teacher and I'm going to write the free pass and I'm going to sit it on my desk and says, Apple, if you behave, you don't get any homework tonight. Um, Apple is known for being late to the popular parties, whether it be gaming, whether it be a feature on a phone, whether it be a feature in their operating system. Apple is known for late to the party, but in their defense, when they show up to the party, Apple, as you said, brings a polished product. The thing with Apple is they like to tease you. They like to, here is Apple AI. I'm not referring to the Apple intelligence that's on the phone. I'm referring, as you said, to AI as a whole. Here is Apple AI. We have it. We have our language models. And then every year, look what the model can do now. Look what the model can do now. Look what the model can do now. It's a feature set. But these features, as you said, are already done, gone, moved on, and the rest of AI is partly past. Now, this goes up to what we have talked about on the pod here many times. We are tech folks. We understand AI. My family members, some of them, well, all of them except me and my brother, are Apple users. 100%. I just an hour ago asked my sister something about AI. She's pretty intelligent. And she looked at me, she said, David, what's AI? That was her question. I don't, Apple runs and I'm going to shut up in a minute, I promise. Apple runs a closed ecosystem. For the most part, you're either in the Apple world or you're out of the Apple world. Apple AI is not going to cross over to your PC. PC AI in the form of apps does cross over to the Apple world. I understand where Mark's coming from. Apple is behind because I think Apple is still trying to figure out what parts of AI do our users want and how can we change them. I hate to use this term, but water them down to make them simple. I've got to do. I can't remember the presenter's name that presents for Apple. I can see his face, but I've got to
Gregory.
do it. Yeah, I've got to do it his way. We've got to simplify your life, and we've got to show you how you can be, doing your daily activities, your recipes. This is how you use AI to do that because that's how Apple markets these things. That's how Apple gets you to buy it. So being behind is one thing for Apple. Putting it in a form that makes it bubbly and consumer friendly for all these people that believe if Apple releases a product, you've got to run to the store the very next day and purchase it. That's where they're struggling. I think it's an overall struggle for Apple. Building
Well,
the product, I think they can do. Presenting the product and what that product should do, I think is a whole other ballgame for Apple.
I mean, they are definitely hardware makers. I wonder, and I'll throw this out there, and then we can wrap this up. What happens if they're late and the entire thing is moved on? And I say this as someone who's looking at Apple Vision Pro, like
I'm
the
going to agree
idea
with you. I know where you're going.
the idea that not only are you late, but you're late to a thing that didn't really exist. So, and I say this because this will be devastating for Microsoft. They will have invested a ton of money. This will be probably worse than Windows Phone when it comes to them, but it won't break the company. The company will move on because again, they're still at the end of the day an enterprise software making company. But if AI is a bust, just takes longer to happen. But Apple has invested that again. If they've been selling their phones essentially on the last few cycles on camera improvements, AI was supposed to be another reason to get people to buy the phone or buy, I wouldn't say necessarily a Mac. A Mac is, it stands by itself, but to buy the phone. Here's your new feature. Here's a new reason to be excited. We're not making foldables. We're not experimenting with anything. It's really the camera and AI now. And if they're spending their time investing in AI and then AI becomes a bust, Microsoft takes a big hit because I mean, they'll convert the data centers into something else or whatever, but they spent all this time hyping it up. Same thing for Google. Apple will have invested this software, this effort to make their new product, the thing that is, kind of lagging on their sales, and it doesn't become a thing. And again, I'm saying this because Apple Vision Pro is not what the Ray-Ban version of augmented reality people wanted. It's a hyper stylized version of VR. They're not even anywhere near making AR a thing. So, really, what happens with the company at that point? Do we see them say, "Hey, not only were we late, but we really didn't have a direction for the past couple of years because we're focused on AI"?
Well, you're right, first of all. And I think You may be more than right, and I think you may be forecasting what could happen at the consumer level with AI in general. I think, as we talked about in the Salesforce story, AI in industry, it's here to stay. It's baked in, it's here.
Mhm.
It's not going anywhere. AI, AI on the consumer level, however, I still think is very much yet to be proven. And Apple, this could be a stalling tactic. Apple is waiting. Are we going to be the ones that were right? Are we going to keep just a watered down version of Apple Intelligence with just the little few features that consumers used? Were we right not to build many language models, gigs and gigs in sizes, and have to worry about whose data we were scraping like the rest of these people did and have to spend all this money? It's possible. Apple could be right because I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know of an Apple user, and I know plenty, that is not in the tech industry that cares for 1 second about Apple Intelligence or anything that Apple is doing inside of AI. Now, and the whole industry, I believe it's 2025 for Samsung. The whole industry, I think, is going to get a wake up call because Samsung put something out the other day as a reminder that I saw that, in a few months, you're going to start seeing that AI subscription, that bill for that service that you've had roughly a year, 18 months, 24 months on these new phones. How many people pay it is my question. Exactly. And I think AI will be something, but it's kind of like power toys or some of the higher end Azure features. They're talked about at the corporate level. That's where they live. Azure lives at the corporate level. Power BI lives at the corporate level. Consumers don't know anything about it. Doesn't come down here. So AI, for the most part, may get pushed up in the business level. You get an improved assistant, call it what you want. You get an improved AI powered, let's do that, AI powered assistant on your phone. And that's where we are. I
Yeah.
could see that model playing out.
If I had to guess, it's going to be financed through your carrier at this point. I think Samsung's going to realize that people don't want to directly pay for it, but they still need to make money. So they'll make a deal with the carriers across the world to be like, hey, offer this as a $5 a month
Mm-hmm.
incentive as a service, and both companies win. The carrier will take a percentage of that. Samsung will still get their monthly subscriber amount, and the consumer will say, "Hey, $5 is better than 10 or 20 directly to Samsung." Who knows? I think that's what's going forward, but we're gonna let you speculate on that. We'll let you guys answer us in the comments or in any of the comments on the articles we write next week about any of this information. If people want to talk to you directly and continue this conversation, where can they go?
Well, they can head over to David PAJ1978 on Threads, or I'm still over there on Twitter under the name. Or for this weekend, you can check behind me the widescreen with the Lenovo powered PC over there. I'm going to be playing some Call of Duty, and my handle over there is David PAJ1978. So if you would like to see me get killed, you are welcome to jump right in and join me.
I will not be playing Call of Duty, unfortunately. I didn't have the time, but you could find me on social media at Mindhead1 on Twitter, Kareem Anderson at Threads and Instagram. I will be on my phone playing Snap because that is all the time I can afford myself these days. But again, reach out to us if you guys want to talk about tech, you want to talk about gaming, you want to talk about pop culture, whatnot. We are available for all of that. Until then, you guys have a great weekend. We hope to see you again next week.
Have a good weekend, folks.